Hello and welcome to Backyard Catch. This is Nick Roby. I am joined by our special guest. This is Faxon Childress. Faxon is on, you can hear him on the Roar locally, 105.5 in Clemson. He is also now newly, he's been on the Fielding of 68 as part of the Field of 68 Media Network, which is really cool. And I've gotten the pleasure of getting to do high school football with him locally in the upstate of South Carolina. So Faxon, you've been bouncing around and it's been really fun. And now we get to do this virtually and just talk about some basketball. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Always good to tap back in with my trusty broadcast partner for high school football here in the upstate, Nick Roby. Thank you for having me on and taking some time out of your day to talk some ACC hoops, man. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I love it. So obviously we're in one of the best weeks of the year. It's kind of fun because next week is the big, well, obviously with Selection Sunday and all the brackets and things like that. But this week, what's really fun is you feel that hype kind of starting, and there's a lot of teams that are really just fighting for an opportunity on Sunday. And so, well, of course, there's a lot nationally, but on the podcast, we kind of hone in a little bit more on ACC basketball just because there's a lot of good stuff to talk about and just like to hone in on that since we're in that part of the country. So we thought it might be fun to just talk about the ACC tournament. And first off, it's kind of funny. I had to remember that it's actually in Washington, D.C., which is interesting. I know they're trying to hit different markets, but I know it's coming back to the Carolinas in the next couple years, which will be nice. But you kind of forget about that, honestly. But yeah, how are you feeling? Like, what's your initial like just feeling about the tournament? Like when you saw the seedings and just saw all of it, like how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction was number one, what a great draw for Clemson down at that 6 seed, getting to potentially play Virginia, who's the 3.
Yeah.
And then my follow up was, man, what a brutal draw for Wake Forest. I mean, obviously they got the big win over Clemson to kind of play themselves back onto
Hmm.
the bubble, which was huge for Steve Forbes and the Demon Deacons. But now you got to play a red hot Micah Shrewsbury and Notre Dame. We'll hit on that matchup a little bit more later, but you got to play them and then potentially Pitt and North Carolina. The Demon Deacons were in the position where they needed to play their way in, and they arguably got the toughest draw in the entire tournament. So that sucks for Steve Forbes. It sucks for Wake.
Yeah, that's hard because not only so, and that's how tight these margins were because they were theoretically they had a chance if to potentially even get the 4 seed. But through that's how close this was. Clemson went from the 4 seed to the 6 seed just because then Pitt beat NC State. So that's how close that like last margin was. So you don't get that, and then you like get arguably one of the hottest teams in the conference, and honestly, it's nationally kind of been underrated because like that freshman guard is so good. He won freshman of the year. And and then you get Pitt, which they're also fighting for their tournament lives. And then if you win that, oh, you get North Carolina, who's like arguably the best team in the conference. So it should be really fun. It's very interesting. We're going to talk all about it. So if you're not quite as familiar with the tournament, or just kind of how it all goes about, I can give like a really brief breakdown. So all 15 teams make it. So NC State obviously is in for basketball, or NC State, Notre Dame. So you start with there. There were 3 playing games, like first round games today, and we're recording this on Tuesday night after having some of those matchups, kind of getting to get a better feel of what the matchups are starting in the second round. And then you have those games, and then you had 4 teams that got the double bye. So that's why those are so important because those top 4 teams, they get to be more rested starting on Thursday, whereas a team that starts on Wednesday, they have to win 4 games in a row in 4 days. So, and a lot of times those types of teams, a couple of those teams are really fighting to make it and if they get the automatic bid and win the whole thing, they get in. But that's really tough to do, especially with some of the teams that have to go in faith. So that's where we're kind of looking with. Who would you say before we kind of get started with the brackets? I've just been curious, and you might have already hit at your answer, but who would you say the ACC tournament is the most important for when it comes to like maybe feel going into the tournament, or you can answer it like who just needs to get into the tournament, or just however you want to take it. Who do you feel like just for pride, like who would you say like it just feels the most important for, like when you look at it?
Oh man, that's tough. I think there's four teams that this tournament's really important for. I think those teams are North Carolina, Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, and Clemson. I think those are the four teams that could
Mhm.
legitimately change the outcome of their season based on whether that's seeding or getting in or being left out of the tournament. And then of course Virginia as well. So really five teams that it matters a
Yeah.
lot for. And out of those, I gotta say, I think the one that it might matter most for is Virginia. When you look at the latest bracketology projections, Virginia is on their way out of the NCAA tournament if it is a brief exit for Tony Bennett in Washington, D.C. Almost
Mhm.
said Greensboro or Charlotte. They need to just move the tournament back to the
I,
Carolinas
I
permanently if we're being
I
real, because
agree.
the travel commute to D.C. is absolutely ridiculous. But with all that being said, man, like Tony Bennett, Virginia, it's put up or shut up time in Charlottesville. And they got to be able to beat the Clemson Tigers or Boston College Eagles, whoever ends up winning that game, to get into the NCAA tournament. I think if they win one, they're in. But if they lose that first one, you saw what happened to Clemson last year, Nick. You don't want to be that ACC team that's sitting on Selection Sunday and is just barely left out of the field. And right now, it's shaping up to that. Potentially could happen to up to three ACC teams with Virginia, Pitt, and Syracuse, or Virginia, Pitt, and Wake Forest, rather, who are all on the bubble. And then Syracuse is a team that they would call a flat bubble team who still has an outside chance. You would think they would need to go on a big run to make it. But Syracuse was in that bubble picture until last week. So, like, this is a good league. It's an underrated league, but it's time to face the harsh reality, which is if Virginia goes out in round one and Pitt and Wake Forest don't make a run, this is a three bid league in the NCAA tournament, which sucks to say. I think it's as stupid as you do, I'm sure. I think this is a league that's better than the Mountain West. I think that this league deserves a lot more respect. But if Virginia loses to Clemson, the ACC, from an optics perspective, has a major, major problem because now in a league that's already been on the decline over the last couple of years and seemingly has lost some respect from the NCAA tournament committee, getting just three bids out of a Power Five league, that would essentially be a nail in the coffin from the NCAA tournament committee to the ACC, saying we don't respect you anymore, and you're going to have to improve your results and improve your league to gain our respect back.
Yeah, I mean, it's well said. I mean, honestly, as I look at this, I think the two teams that I think the most are, and I just kind of agree with you, you might have to say Virginia, which sounds kind of crazy because they're the three seed. But if you remember, as both of us follow Clemson very closely, Clemson was the three seed. And they actually won the first game. They made the semifinals and they lost to that Virginia team and they still got left out. Virginia, they've had some tough losses and the non-con was okay. And I think that's what's interesting about with the selection committee and kind of the feel of the year. The net has obviously become like a little bit more of a metric, and we don't have to get on all into that and all of its flaws, but it is a data point that does get used. And the non-conference has been the net has been emphasized more. And so last year was like the non-conference seemed like it wasn't as strong. Well, now some teams have made stronger non-conferences or they you adjust and it feels like the ACC is kind of maybe like a year or two behind in the adjustments of what a lot of people internationally are doing and take that for what it is. But yeah, I think Virginia, it's not a great look if they lose. And I would say, but for Clemson, like if they win, it actually really helps them and you continue to help their seed. So it's kind of a interesting turning point. Yeah, I think Wake needs to definitely win at least one. They're very close too. I mean, I think Clemson ends up getting or Clemson, the ACC ends up getting four, but it's tough, man. And you could argue if Wake Forest wins, which that's not a gimme against Notre Dame. We'll talk about that. But if Wake Forest wins between them and Pitt, I mean, that's almost like a playing game in and of itself, you know? And the problem for like Pitt is they're just picking up and their non-conference wasn't great. So it's very interesting. There's a lot on the line. And, I think from an outside's perspective, you might look and like say, like, okay, North Carolina and Duke are going to just end up in the final, and that's the big storyline. But I would say there's actually a lot of other storylines in this that make it interesting. And that's what's so crazy about these tournaments is that these can go so many different ways that it's hard to know where it's going to go. Okay. So maybe we'll start with the brackets. Let's start with that and kind of go from that way. We'll start in the second round so that and I'll kind of mention the first round game that happened if it plays into that. So the second round starts on Wednesday. It's number 8 Virginia Tech against number 9 Florida State. That's a noon game. The winner gets North Carolina. This one's interesting because you've got all the athleticism from a Florida State team versus a Virginia Tech team that can shoot the ball with anybody. But the problem is, it feels like they kind of live and die by the three sometimes, and it's really how well Sean Padula and Hunter Couture go. So, how are you feeling about this? I feel like this is it might be kind of an evenly matchup when it comes down to the end of it, just with two different styles of play.
Yeah, I really think I'm leaning towards backing Virginia Tech and Mike Young here against Florida State. The Hokies, in my opinion, are probably one of the most underrated teams in college basketball. Now, it's hard to have too much sympathy for them because, hey, like when you look at that record, the win-loss is not impressive, right? And they've got a lot of losses, and they've got a couple losses that are just straight up inexcusable. They lost to Florida State earlier in the year, 77-74, down in Tallahassee. So that's something, it's a bullet point that you can keep in your mind. But they got their lick back, and they got their revenge in the more recent matchup on February 13th, where they were able to beat them by 8 at home. So I don't think there's some monumental gap between these two teams. But when you look at Virginia Tech and some of the injury adversity they've had to deal with over the course of the year to both Padula and Couture, who have been hurt, a couple rotation pieces off the bench. And on the other side, there are some positive storylines, like Lynn Kidd has really broke out of his shell rather this year. And, he's been a breakout candidate in the ACC, was a former Brad Brownell player at Clemson. So he kind of went that inner ACC transfer portal, came in the same recruiting class, PJ Hall and Olivier Maxine Prosper. It's safe to say that Brad Brownell hit it out of the park with his evaluation there. Now, obviously, Omax ends up going to Marquette and being a first-round draft pick. PJ Hall is going to be drafted in the NBA. And, hey, maybe Lynn Kidd's up next. But with all that being said, Virginia Tech's a top 30 offensive team in KenPom. Defense is almost outside the top 100. Good offensive basketball team that doesn't like to guard. I'm expecting a game in the 80s tomorrow where both of their first two matchups were. And I'm going to give Mike Young the edge because he has deep ACC tournament experience, making a deep run in that ACC tournament. And then he also has NCAA tournament experience. Those are two things Leonard Hamilton has as well. But with that being said, Mike Young has that experience in the last 3, 4, 5 years and with players that are currently on his roster. I think those guys are going to want to play for him. I think those guys can recognize the outside perspective looking in, which is, hey, VT kind of disappointed a lot of people this year. We were all expecting Virginia Tech to be in the NCAA tournament. So I think those guys go hard, and I think they could potentially give North Carolina a run for their money in the quarters as well if they're playing good basketball.
Yeah, and I think that's a great, and honestly, I lean Virginia Tech too. I think an underrated part of this too is we talked about how Washington D.C. there's not a particular team in the footprint. I know the ACC has been trying to hit these different markets, but Virginia Tech is one of the closest teams actually,
Yep.
and they're very supportive of their team. Now we'll see as an 8 seed how much they really show up for that, but they'll definitely have more fans than I would say Florida State. And if we remember, I mean, I think you hit this too. Like a couple years ago, they made the run. Like they made a run and got into the tournament, as probably a higher bubble seed than they are now. But yeah, I wouldn't sleep on this Virginia Tech team. They can shoot the ball, and those guys can play. And like you said, what I mean, I kind of you don't forget, but just when you think back on it, like man, like those three bigs that came into Clemson and two of them left. But I mean, that's pretty wild. And the thing for Florida State is they need to get out and run. They do really well when they can, you know, have the long arms and they can guard well, get out in space and get those transition buckets. I think for Virginia Tech, they love the three ball. But if they fall in love with the three ball too much and it can lead out to fast breaks, I think that can keep Florida State in the game. But like you said, I just like Virginia Tech a little bit better. I think it'd be a close one, but I think Virginia Tech pulls it out. And like you said, then they go into the next round. Does that momentum carry them against a North Carolina team who's feeling really good about themselves? But I think North Carolina's pretty locked in as well. So yeah, I got to go Virginia Tech in that one. The next matchup is Wake Forest, who's the 5 seed. They get Notre Dame, who beat out Georgia Tech, a little pesky Georgia Tech team, 84-80. Notre Dame is the 12 seed, but like we said earlier, arguably one of the hottest teams in the ACC. Honestly, they're a team that I don't know if anyone really wants to face. And like you said, Wake Forest, they got the win over Clemson, but now they get a Notre Dame team who is just playing with nothing to lose. So this is a very intriguing matchup. Who's somebody that you're watching in this one?
Yeah, I actually think this is one of the most intriguing matchups of the ACC tournament. And I think a big reason for that is just like the desperation factor with Wake Forest, right? They're on the outside looking in on the bubble, probably a team that's not going to get an at-large bid at this juncture. Probably need to win 3 games, in my opinion. The predictive metrics love Wake. The numbers love them. They're still 26th in KenPom, even though they have a 19-12 record and only 2 quad 1 wins. But like, you got to do something on the court too. Like, the predictive metrics can love you as much as you want, and even I take that into account. A team that doesn't have great predictive metrics, I think that matters. But at the end of the day, Wake Forest is a better basketball team than South Carolina. And South Carolina, predictive metrics hate them. And the predictive metrics love Wake Forest. We need to see you get wins on the court. So if this team's, money is where their mouth is, go win 3 games. Go get in the NCAA tournament. Go prove to us that you can win a game. Because here's the thing. Teams like Wake Forest folding down the stretch in seasons is really bad for teams that follow this mold with the metrics going forward, because it's going to create an unfair stigma onto other teams in the future for lack of trust, when this individual Wake Forest team, it's not really an accurate representation. Like, their wins and loss record isn't an accurate representation of who they are as a basketball team. Steve Forbes has had one of the most toughest coaching jobs in America this year. He's really coached 3 different teams because of the injuries. Reed missed a ton of time. Monsanto was their leading 3-point scorer last year. He's played in like 12 games this year, didn't participate in senior night because he was complaining about his playing time. And now we don't even know, like, I haven't even seen an update on him, to be completely honest with you. I'm going to assume that he's not even on the team as of right now. So this team has dealt with all sorts of adversity, all sorts of injuries. Steve Forbes has done an incredible job, and the metrics love him. But at the end of the day, man, you can't go LLL to Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech with your season on the line. I know they salvaged it a little bit and they beat Clemson, but like, you were sitting pretty. You had finally gotten Lenardi off your back. You had finally gotten all the bracketologists on Twitter off your back, and you dumped 3 games in a row. They were in the last 4 buys. Like, they had gotten completely off the bubble at one point before they dumped those 3 games. So for me, I'm picking Notre Dame. I know that Wake Forest was able to bounce back and beat Clemson. I would hope that you would be able to do that to at least, like, you were playing for your season at that point. But the game on Tuesday, February 27th, a couple weeks back, I didn't feel like that was a fluke. And I don't think what Micah Shrewsbury is doing down the stretch is a fluke. I think this is a more accurate representation of who this basketball team is than through the hell stretch they were going through in January, right? They lost like 8 straight games at one point. But the fact that this team has rallied around Micah Shrewsbury, and the fact that this team has rallied around Marcus Burton, and the fact that this team is playing with such a moxie and such a confidence and such a swagger, they're playing free basketball. I think that is what it is for Micah, man. Like, we all know the guy's a great coach, but you're motivating a team that was 12 games beneath 500 at the midway point in your season to compete and win big league games down the stretch against NCAA tournament teams. Hey, man, you're going to get the tip of the cap from me every time. So hats off to Micah Shrewsbury, and I'm not going to be the one to rain on his parade. I think they can get it done tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. on ESPN, because I really am just a believer in the basketball that this team's playing. Top 30 team in the country in KenPom defense. Their offense can be a little anemic at times. I'll be the first to admit it. But with the basketball that Burton's playing and with Braden Shrewsbury stepping up, I think this team can get it done.
Yeah, it's hard to argue against that. I'm going to try, but it's hard. And I think it's a great point. Arguably, this is a team to watch next year. Like, do not let this final standing like fool you and like we'll let a whole year go by. This team is going to be a lot better next year. Shrewsbury can coach. He's going to start getting more of a system. The guys are getting bought in. They're a tough out, and I would not sleep on Notre Dame. So here's the thing with Wake Forest. And also tough if Notre Dame wins some of the earlier games, that's a whole different story for them. Like even in the non-conference. Wake Forest, they lost 1 home game all year. We've talked about what we talked about. They've lost 1 home game to Georgia Tech. Does that make sense? Not really, but there you go. They beat Duke at home. I don't think that was a fluke. The problem is, I think they only won like 2 official road games. Like they just don't play well outside of Winston-Salem, and that's hard. I will say though, it's neutral site, and Steve Forbes and coach. I think it's gonna be a very interesting X's and O's and just a feel of a game. I think it's gonna be very tight. To me, though, I think it's hard to bet. Hunter Salas has just been such an underrated player. And I think what Forbes has gotten out of the transfer portal has been really impressive. Hildreth is, another veteran backcourt guard. I just think the veteran, when I'm betting on I wouldn't say I don't feel 100% great on this. I think this is one of those toss-up games. You come to the final, this is within a possession type of a game. Like, but I'm just trusting the backcourt upperclassmen of Wake Forest, and that they'll find a way because they have to. But I will say Notre Dame's going to give them every shot, and I think that it's an afternoon matchup. But if you can watch it, this one's one to watch for sure.
Nick, what I will say as well, I think it's important to remember this about Wake Forest. Wake Forest is a team that in the Steve Forbes era, once again, I'm not trying to take anything away from Wake. They've had some great successes under Steve Forbes. But do you remember 2 years ago where they were 25-10 in the regular season with Alondas Williams, who won the ACC Player of the Year, and they lost their first game with a double bye of the ACC tournament to 13 seed Boston College. This team has not been good in the ACC tournament under Steve Forbes. Like, I saw the line tomorrow. They were 9-point favorites. I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. And
you hammer that.
I'll go out on the limb of looking like a moron. This team has not been able to get up and play games outside of Joel Coliseum all year. KenPom has it as the 5th largest home court advantage in college basketball, which means they're the 5th best home team in college basketball this year, essentially. Here are their results away from home. So you can tell me if you can stop me if you're impressed by any of this. Okay. They lost to Georgia away from home. They lost to Utah on a neutral court, beat Towson on a neutral court, lost to LSU in overtime on a neutral court. Away from home, they beat Boston College, lost to Florida State, lost to NC State, lost to North Carolina, lost to Pitt. They beat Georgia Tech, lost to Duke, lost to Virginia, lost to Notre Dame, and lost to Virginia Tech. So this team has 3 wins all season away from Joel Coliseum, or 4 wins all season away from Joel Coliseum, and one of those came on a neutral court. The proof is in the pudding at this point for me. And if it's not Notre Dame, I think Pitt's going to kill them, if you want me to be completely honest. And And like, do I think that Wake is one of the best 64 teams in the country? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think that they probably are a tournament at large worthy team? Yes, but you can't shoot yourself in the foot down the stretch when you're already on the bubble like they did. You just can't do it, man. You can't. Their fans will complain, and like it's warranted to an extent, but you can't do that, and their fan base knows that as well.
Yeah, and I think their strength of schedule, if I remember correctly, wasn't like the best, going into this. And so when you do that, you just don't leave yourself a lot of margin. And I think that's the hard part for them. How many games do you? And I kind of agree. I like Pitt in the matchup. If they get to that, how many games do you think they have to win?
I think Wake Forest has to win 3 games. I think they have to beat North Carolina. Like, I genuinely think they're out. If they don't beat North Carolina, they're out. They have to beat Notre Dame tomorrow. They have to turn around and beat Pitt, and then they have to beat North Carolina. If they do that, they're in. Even if, and I'm telling you right now, this is exactly what's going to happen if it does happen. If they beat Notre Dame and Pitt and lose a close game to North Carolina, everyone and their mother is going to be out on Twitter. This team's got 21 wins. They just beat a tournament team in Pitt. They played North Carolina really, really close. And then everyone's going to be fake surprised when they get left out of the tournament. If you're paying attention and you're keeping up with the bracketology, you already know that Wake Forest is on the outside looking in. And the committee is not going to be moved by a win over Pitt, who is not currently in the NCAA tournament field. Pitt is not. Pitt is on the outside looking in as well. So, if your big run is Notre Dame and Pitt and then crashing out in the quarters, it's not going to happen, bro. I can't see a scenario where Wake Forest makes a run. And I'm not trying to bash Forbes. I'm not trying to bash the Demon Deacs because I think they're a great team and I've defended them. But admittedly, I'm a little jaded at how stupid they made me look down the stretch. Like, how are you dropping 3 games to those 3 opponents back to back to back with your season on the line? Unbelievable to me. They clearly missed Monsanto.
Yeah. That extra oomph on offense. Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about Wake Forest, but they're one of definitely the bubble teams that
they're the storyline.
They're
the storyline in the ACC this year, in my opinion, because of like the hot start and then like just Joe Lunardi beefing with their fans. I think this is the most tantalized I've been by an ACC team other than Clemson in the last 5 years. And it's been hilarious to watch everybody like go at each other on Twitter. I've just been sitting back with my popcorn the whole time.
Yeah, well, you better pop some because they got a mid-afternoon tip tomorrow. So we'll find out really quickly. I like it. So let's move on for time's sake because we got a couple more I want to hit too. But yeah, I'm all with you. We got NC State, who won against Louisville, who ended up being like a pretty pesky Louisville team at the end of the season. NC State won 94-85, and they get Syracuse. This is the 7 p.m. game. It's the 7 versus the 10. It's interesting, and like you said, Syracuse is like that flat bubble, and they need to really make a run. And NC State, honestly, kind of ended the season a little disappointing. I would say like they had some opportunities earlier in this side of the calendar to make a tournament run. So these are both teams on the outside looking in. Do you think Syracuse, like, is Syracuse just get the win here? Like, does it feel close? How do you feel about this one?
Honestly, don't know how to like. These are two teams that are pretty similar from a resume perspective, with the Wolfpack coming in at 18 and 14, the Orange are 20 and 11. I think Autry's done a fantastic job in year one at the helm up in Syracuse.
Mhm.
I don't think people realize, like, I'm not going to say bad, but I don't think people realize how not great Jim Boeheim was for the last decade of coaching Syracuse basketball. This was their first 21 season in a decade. Syracuse basketball under
Wow.
Jim Boeheim. This was their first 21 season in almost a decade. So Autry's done a fantastic job. And like, man, they got kids that can fill it up. Judah Mintz is a dog. That's a professional basketball player in the NBA in my eyes. I think that's an NBA guy. I think Kadir Copeland is one of the most underrated players in the entire conference. I know he's not super efficient shooting the basketball, but when he gets hot, he is an instant offense pressure cooker
Mhm.
off the bench. Benny Williams was a player that was a significant contributor, has dealt with some injury issues. And then you got JJ Starling and Chris Bell, who can also play. And then for NC State, obviously you got the usual suspects with Burns and Horn as kind of the dynamic duo. And then Jaden Taylor's a good player as well. Casey Morcell, from former Clemson player Ben Middlebrooks. Like, these are two teams that are, and I don't mean any disrespect by saying this, these are two teams that like belong in the NIT, and that's just who they were this year. Like, they're both good basketball teams. I'm confident by saying that. I think NC State is good. I consider them good, and I consider Syracuse good. They're not NCAA tournament good. Syracuse has a lot more chance of making a run down the stretch with how their numbers align and what their resume shows, to, like, if we want to call it a slightly alive bubble. If Syracuse were to go on
Mhm.
a tear, I mean, you're not dead till you're dead. So it could happen, but I'll take Syracuse in the game, but I just can't see either one of these teams beating Duke in the next round on the neutral court, which is, I think, is my hesitation for like why I can't get super excited for the matchup necessarily. Is like, you're walking into the hands of a motivated Duke team off of a loss to UNC. Good luck when you roll that ball out on Thursday, because it ain't gonna be pretty for either of them.
Yeah, and I think that they're both pretty heavy on like a couple of key players for their offense. And I think that's the problem for them, is that, and I wonder just the fatigue factor too. And I think that's just an underrated part of this. Like, there's a reason why they've rewarded, the top four seeds, and they get to rest longer. And that's what's tough, is you have to win this game, which feels like it could be a close battle too. And the next game, you turn around and get a motivated Duke team, and you know, your bigs get tired and get in foul trouble. And yeah, I agree. I think Judah Mintz he's a baller. If you get to watch him, like, I agree. He isn't like, his mid range is so impressive. Syracuse, they do a really good job of getting steals. They're one of the best teams at getting steals. Like, if you watch
Yep.
that, they might not be the best. Like, that's how they stop their defense, is that they switch to the man to the man, but they like to get in the passing lanes. Honestly, Copeland, like, he didn't win Sixth Man of the Year. He was second behind Shamet, if I think is how you say that right, or Shamit from Pitt. But
Yeah.
Copeland, I mean, I almost wondered if, like, he might have gotten my vote, honestly. Like, he was such a big spark plug for them, and they're not fun to play. I would say neither of these teams are a fun team to play, but like you said, this feels kind of about right for them, And so you keep the season going, but it's hard to get as excited for it because of who you have to play. Um, and I just think I'm gonna go NC State, just because I think, like, I really like DJ Burns, and I really like some of the aspects that they have. And yeah, I'm just gonna go NC State in a close one, but I like Syracuse. To me, it feels like a toss up, but like you said, I feel like Duke wins either way. So it's hard to get as excited for this one, honestly.
What
But
I will say over in this game, because North Carolina State had no interest in guarding Louisville today from when the ball was tipped. I texted my boys in the group chat right when they tipped off. I was like, this is ending in the 90s. I was like, don't question it. I just know that this is ending in the 90s. NC State didn't look interested in playing any defense. So Syracuse doesn't play any defense in general. I think this game's like 88-84 final. So it'll be a fun one to watch. They'll go get trounced by Duke in the next round. That is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's 100%. It's going to be like a lot of threes, a lot of
back and forth.
Yeah. Back and forth. Yep. It's going to be the buckets are going to be rolling for the nightcap. And so in the nightcap, so I'm pulling the bracket up. It is Clemson and Boston College. So Boston College as the 11 seed beat Miami 81-65. So Miami, I mean, we don't have to hit it that much, but Miami goes from the Final Four a year before to now they're one and done in the first round. Very disappointing for them. Injuries and it just didn't float well in the second half, you know. And Boston College, another underrated team, you know, like they're playing with nothing to lose. Quentin Post is a great player and, you know, an underrated player in this. So it's not the easiest of matchups for Clemson, you know. I would say this one's interesting. Like I would say I agree with you when it comes to we've talked about this earlier. I really like Clemson's like path for them as a 6 seed, but this arguably is kind of a tough like to kind of get the ball rolling because Boston College feels really good about themselves coming into this matchup. So how are you feeling about this from a Clemson's perspective, getting a Boston College team that got a comfortable win today?
I'm confident. I'm confident if I'm Clemson. I actually think that now what I will say, I love Earl Grant. I think that guy's going to be a great Power 5 head coach one day. And I think he's kind of gotten the short end of the stick a little bit at Boston College because of some of their limitations financially and facilities-wise. And it's a hard place to recruit up in Chestnut Hill. Gorgeous school for what it's worth. Beautiful campus. Hard place to recruit. I think there's a little bit of overreaction going on within the Clemson fan base right now about paranoia with this matchup against Boston College. Like, this is the thing with Boston College for me. Boston College has pretty much beat everybody they're supposed to beat the entire year, and they've lost to the majority of the good teams. The best win of Boston College's season, I'm still looking. I'm on KenPom right now, Nick. St. John's. St. John's on a neutral site is the best one of the season, and that's a team that's not definitively in the NCAA tournament right now. Their league wins came against Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, Syracuse, Louisville, Miami, Louisville, and Miami. So they've beaten Miami 3 different times. That's 3 of their conference wins, including the conference tournament. This team hasn't beaten anyone with a pulse all year. It would shock me. It would absolutely shock me if a Clemson team that's coming off of an emotional loss to Wake Forest were to roll over and die tomorrow against Boston College. Now, Quentin Post is a great player. Claudel Harris is a great player. They have a great coach in Earl Grant who has beaten Brad Brownell before and had some success there. Zachary's a guy that can play. McLaughlin can play. But Clemson is the significantly better basketball team than Boston College. I think you would agree with me when I say that Tigers are favored, and rightfully so. And if you're Clemson, I'm looking at this matchup like, hey, man, you know, we're on the 6th line right now in the NCAA tournament. We're the 6th seed in the ACC. We're not getting a ton of national respect after we were at the beginning of the season. It's a chance to flip the script. You know, people are out here saying that Boston College got a shot against you. If I'm the Tigers, I'm taking that as a chip on my shoulder and saying, hey, let's go beat them by 15, and then Virginia is going to be scared to death to play us the following day. So that's the way I would approach it from a Clemson perspective. And as far as a game analysis perspective goes, obviously, as a Clemson student and somebody that keeps up with the team, I know them better than about anybody else. But Boston College just doesn't do anything particularly well as a basketball team outside of shoot the 3 ball at an above average rate. 71st in the country in offensive efficiency, 128th in the country in offensive efficiency. Now, if we want to look at conference only numbers, 10th in the ACC offensively, 12th in the ACC defensively. They shoot the 3 ball at the 5th best clip rather in the ACC. So that's a positive. And they shoot the 3 ball all on a top 50 scale nationally as well. This is a team that can shoot the 3. They play inside out with Quentin Post, but they literally don't do anything else at a top 50 national level on the basketball court. If Clemson wants to be a contender in the NCAA tournament, like I believe they are, and like I know the coaching staff and players believe they are, this is a game you got to handle at the beginning of the ACC tournament.
I think it's spot on. I think the first 20 minutes are very important for Clemson. I think how they come out and how they respond is very important, and sometimes in these games I've watched a lot of Clemson games where they come from behind and it gets close and then they pull away late. from a Clemson's perspective, I think for them going forward, if you want to see them make a run and how they are as ACC as an ACC team representing in the NCAA tournament, you want to see them coming out well because Boston College is like you said, they can put a little run together and you don't want to be playing catch up, and I think a thing to
Yeah.
watch is just how Post and Hall play with one another, how the fouls are, with each of them. But like you said, I think Clemson's too much for them. I just think it's an interesting first round matchup, but I do think that Clemson has an opportunity to build some momentum and then get Virginia, who's then trying to build some momentum. And then they're, arguably the closest team to Washington, D.C. They might get some little bit of pressure, like, hey, we actually have to make a run. And then Clemson is just kind of playing free, and I
Yeah.
think that's when Clemson plays its best, honestly. So I like Clemson. I think it stays a little close, but then Clemson pulls away. I
Yeah.
do. I think it's a little too much. Okay. So as we continue to do this, who would you say has the best chance to make a run? We've kind of talked about this, but who would you say has a best chance to make a run, quarterfinals on? We have the top two seeds, maybe outside of Duke and North Carolina. Who would you say is the next team that can make a run to championship Saturday?
Well, it's the easy answer, but the correct answer, in my opinion, is Clemson. I mean, this is the third best team in the ACC, regardless of what the seed and conference record says. It's a team that's definitively in the field of 68 and is a lock for the NCAA tournament. Currently on the 5 line or the 6 line, depending on where you look for your information.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we'll see on Selection Sunday, which isn't that far away, which is kind of crazy to think about. Feels like the season just started. But with all that being said, on top of Clemson being a better basketball team outside of every team but Duke and North Carolina in the conference, in my opinion, I think the draw is a lot easier than Wake Forest and Pitt got because you got to run into that buzzsaw. Man, Hubert Davis
Mm-hmm.
got the Tar Heels playing such great basketball.
Yeah.
They're back.
Yeah.
They are back. North Carolina basketball is back. So for me, Clemson's ability to play Boston College in the first round, not going to call it a freebie because Boston College is capable of winning any game that they play in, but that's a game that you're expecting you need to win. Against Tony Bennett in Virginia, it's been an opponent that Brad Brownell has not had a ton of success against over the course of his career. But with that being said, Tony Bennett has pretty much mopped everyone in the ACC for the last 10 years. I mean, the guy won a freaking national championship in Charlottesville, Virginia. He deserves a ton of credit. And while I'm a Tony Bennett hater because I hate playing Tony Bennett and I hate watching their teams play, sometimes you got to call respect. I respect Tony Bennett. I respect him so much I hate him. That guy is an unbelievable basketball coach with the pack line defense, with all the iconic moments they had on that March Madness run. That guy is a freaking legend. Clemson's a better basketball team than Virginia this year, though, and they need to play like it. And the way that Virginia has played down the stretch has been nothing short of shambolic. Their offense has completely unraveled. They got beat by 40 multiple times over the span of 5 games. There's a lot of concerns with this basketball team. So I think that Clemson getting Virginia, a lot of Clemson fans are like, hey, this is House of Horrors against Virginia, right? It's Tony Bennett in the ACC tournament. This is how our season ended last year. Got all the way to the semis, played Tony Bennett and lost. This ain't the same old Virginia. This is a team that's almost outside the top 200 nationally offensively. 200. This team's not winning an NCAA tournament game if they get in. I will be actively rooting for them to be left out. Even though it will be better for the ACC, I don't want to watch this team play a game because I don't think they're very good. So that's where my belief in Clemson kicks in. It's not even just full-blown belief hey, this is a contender. This is a team that can for real win a national championship, because I don't believe that. I think Clemson's a team that probably caps out in the Elite Eight. But if we're just talking ACC hoops, this is the 3rd best team in the league. They're playing a Virginia team that's dead in the water. You got to get the job done in the quarterfinals.
Yeah. It's well said. I think, Virginia historically, I respect them a lot. I think this is a Virginia version where if as an opponent, you're not as maybe when you look at them on paper, individual matchups, you're not as intimidated as you would be in other matchups. I mean, they got Dunn, who's Defensive Player of the Year. Beekman's a baller. But you kind of always wonder where the scoring's coming from. And if you remember from Clemson's perspective, they were a Jack Clark 3 away from winning that game. It was a 1-point game, and that goes back and forth. It's a neutral site game. It's bitter. You have that bitter taste in your mouth. For me, my answer is Clemson too. And then then so to say a different name, like I'm saying Clemson, but I want to kind of make sure we hit Pitt a little bit too, is that Pitt can get hot. Pitt beat Duke at their place. Like
Yeah.
Blake Hinson, if you haven't watched, like that dude is a baller and he can get hot. Like these guys can play. And if you catch North Carolina napping, I'm not saying that they're going to be favored or like, or even I feel great about it. But I'm saying is if you get North Carolina, maybe like just feeling a little good about themselves, catch them napping, you can get on top of them. And I've seen Pitt get hot. And I can see Pitt making a little bit of just a surprise run. Not, I feel better at Clemson, but just to say a different name and to talk about, I feel like Pitt has another opportunity, and and then they have everything to play for, to get into the tournament. So, yeah, I like it. So we've talked a lot about the tournament. Who you got? Championship Saturday. Who you got? I feel like we're leaning the same way. I feel like we're leaning the same way, but who you got?
I got North Carolina over Clemson, and picking the 1 seed in a conference tournament prediction on a podcast is the ultimate coward move. And I'm being a coward because I believe North Carolina is that good. And I think they're going to play their way on the 1 line. And once again, like, I don't want to just pick the favorite and then if they win, act like I'm a genius. But I'm telling you guys right now, North Carolina can win the national championship. That team is this good this year. Armando Bacot, RJ Davis, the ACC player of the year. Ingram's playing great basketball on the wing. Hey, Cormac Ryan, you got a 3 ball now. Did we see that game against Duke? We were watching the same game. Cormac Ryan splashing from downtown. Not a lot of teams in the country that can beat this North Carolina team. So even though it's kind of the coward way out, picking the 1 seed, I think Clemson's going to get hot and go on a run on the other side of the bracket. Not sure it's going to matter in that championship game who North Carolina is facing off against. I'm not sure RJ Davis are losing another game this season. I'm going to have this team in my final 4 in the bracket once I get to see the draw. That's how high I am on this North Carolina team.
And here's the thing with this North Carolina team. They are a team that I've seen them. They are super talented. And last year they had some internal stuff going on. And at times you like kind of wondered like, are they 100% like all the way bought in? Like they're just so talented. I think that's why they can be frustrating to watch sometimes because like you're so talented that they get kind of, you know, into the game. This team is very focused right now. Hubert Davis, like he won coach of the year, and he's done an excellent job. If you're getting Cormac Ryan, he scored 31 at Duke.
Yeah.
You're getting him with RJ Davis. Are you
Yeah.
kidding me? Baycott doesn't even care about numbers right now. And also, this is important. I was listening to our our friend, Terrence Oglesby, his podcast on with the Field of 68, and they're talking about like how this team hasn't really gotten to win a whole lot. If I remember correctly, North Carolina has not won the ACC tournament since like 2016.
Yeah.
I don't know if they even referenced that, but it's been actually a little bit. And this team, like, they want to win some stuff, and they're very motivated to do so. And yeah, I can see them playing tough defense. Yeah, I'm from. You're happy to not be on that side of the bracket, so it's hard to bet against North Carolina. Honestly, I've got North Carolina and Clemson as well, and I know maybe on the other side you might have some homerism since we're both Clemson guys, but it's hard. Clemson, I agree. Clemson is arguably the third best team, and I think they let some games get away from them, and then they get a rematch with Duke. And I'm telling you, Clemson like played Duke really well. It's a neutral court. Duke might be looking ahead towards a rematch with North Carolina. I think if Clemson gets past Virginia, I think they make the championship game. I do. But I also can see them running out of gas because that's tough to win 4 games in 4 days against how much speed North Carolina plays with. So I'm going to go North Carolina as well. I know it's the 1 seed, but North Carolina, it's hard to bet against them.
It
They
is,
are one of the
man.
they are one of the top. If you maybe have say circle 8 teams that like legitimately have a chance to win a national title. North Carolina is one of those teams. And if Duke makes it, and even I'm just going to say this scenario, say Duke makes it again, like for me, I'm still betting North Carolina. I know it's tough to beat them 3 times in a row. From what I saw, like I think North Carolina has their number this year, and they're just too talented and they can beat you in too many ways.
Well, I also think that like the extra year of experience that Hubert Davis has in comparison to John Shire is starting to show itself, right? Like we all know that Hubert Davis started his career with an absolute bang going to the national championship game. Like he ended Coach K's
Mm-hmm.
career. Let's not get it twisted. Hubert Davis ended Coach K's career in the Final Four, which is insane
Yeah.
to think about to this day, that he did that
Wow.
as a first-year head coach. But what people don't realize about this North Carolina team, Nick, this is the fifth best defensive team in this country. In the country, North Carolina is a top 5 defensive team. Now, we fall in love with the RJ Davis and the Cormac Ryan and the Baycott because they're scoring a ton of points and it's super fun to watch. But the nitty gritty in March, you're going to win on defense. And North Carolina can win an ugly, low scoring game. They've proven that over the course of the season. I just really, really hope for North Carolina's sake that they don't let that be their championship. And what I mean by that is don't be Jason Tatum Duke. Don't win the ACC tournament and then go out in the round of 32 as like a 1 or a 2 seed, because that would be a terrible look for the league at that point. So that's my ask of North Carolina is, even if we do win it, guys, don't crash out early in the NCAA tournament because you run out of gas chasing the ACC tournament.
Honestly, one of the few things, and just from an ACC's perspective, that they've been able to hang their hat on is how many teams have gotten to the Final Four,
Yeah.
how many teams have won a national title in the past few years. And honestly, like, I think North Carolina is the make it or break it for a Final Four team this year. I just don't know. Duke has an outside shot, but I just think that North Carolina is that team. If an ACC gets a Final Four team this year, I just think that's it. But yeah, I agree. We're both picking North Carolina, so there you go. But hey, as Clemson guys, we picked North Carolina, so we're being we're being as honest as we can. Um, Another thing I just want to hit before we go, I'm referencing, and Tio also pointed out the all ACC teams. I was going to run through that really quickly and just kind of see how you felt about it.
Yeah.
What was your gut reaction? So first team was RJ Davis. He actually won the most votes. PJ Hall from Clemson was the number 2. He only missed out by 10 points. Filipowski from Duke, Hunter Salas from Wake, Blake Hinson was the first team from Pitt. Second team was Baycott from North Carolina, Beekman from Virginia, Judah Mintz from Syracuse, Nochad Amir from Miami, Host from Boston College. Third team was Horn from NC State, Harrison Ingram, North Carolina, Jeremy Roach, Duke, Marcus Burton, Notre Dame, and Sean Padula, Virginia Tech. What was your so that was just a very quick, rundown. What was your just gut reaction of the all ACC teams?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that the vast majority of the selections were deserved. I'm somebody that doesn't typically look a ton into those type of polls, even though I do think that they have value. But like on the same tangent, I do think that the voters earn the right to vote the next year for a reason, and people get pretty outraged over these voting processes. It's not that deep, would be what I would say to the people that get like super upset that your player isn't on an all ACC team. But at the same time, like I think the voters did a good job. I think that the majority of these results are how I would have voted on a hypothetical ballot. And I think RJ Davis deserved that ACC Player of the Year award. I think that was a deserved award. I think PJ is right where he should be on the first team. But like what Davis did this year at UNC was just special. This turned into a pro UNC podcast, man. If like the way I was raised in my household as a Clemson fan, my dad would not be happy with the positive propaganda I'm pushing for UNC right now. But got to be objective. And RJ Davis was the best player in the league this year. He deserved the ACC Player of the Year, and he played on the best team in the conference as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard for me to knock a lot of it. I mean, I think you could have argued that Shefflin should have made a team.
I
He
agree.
just didn't score. He didn't score enough, I think, sometimes, and people definitely look at that. I'm happy to see a guy like Marcus Burton from Notre Dame that he made it. Sean Padula, I'm happy to see that he made it. He can really score. Joe Girard, I was a little surprised didn't make a team, but also it's hard to argue against a lot of these guys like Judah Mintz second team. Baycott made a second team, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, it's hard to argue with a lot of these. I just think there's a lot of players that you're like, man, I could see that. And so yeah, like you said, I wouldn't think too much about it. But it's just always interesting to see how those kind of play out. And then if you hadn't heard, just to kind of mention it really quickly, I know you have, but just Hubert Davis from North Carolina won Coach of the Year. Sixth Man of the Year was Shamet from Pitt, and then Most Improved was Ian Shefflin, which really I thought that was pretty cool. And then Freshman of the Year was Marcus Burton. So a lot of that kind of hit about where we thought, and not super surprised, and people definitely pay attention. So yeah. Okay, so I guess we'll end it with this. We talked about at the beginning. How many teams from the ACC make the tournament? If you're going to guess a number, you think three?
It sucks to say because for people who might be listening that aren't super familiar with me, I'm very pro ACC. I think this is an underrated conference. I think that this is a conference that deserves 5+ bids, even in a down year. I think this is a team that has a true national title contender in North Carolina, another team that's capable of making a Final Four in Duke, and a team that could potentially push an Elite Eight in Clemson. With that being said, sometimes you nail your own coffin down the stretch in the season. And
Yeah,
in the cases of Virginia and Wake Forest, they've pulled the coffin down on themselves like this and then nailed it from the outside. That's essentially what Wake did to themselves down the stretch. And Virginia did that to themselves by losing by 40 plus twice down the stretch of the season in league play. So
yeah,
for me, I'm super into. I keep up with all the numbers. I check bracketology
yeah,
daily. Like I'm a nerd about it. I'm a self-admitted nerd. Last year kind of started like the obsession for the process, keeping up with all the Clemson stuff and like being outraged about the net rankings and stuff along those lines. But as somebody that just like keeps up with this every day and and hosting some bracketology shows over on the
yeah,
Field 68 Media Network and getting to talk to some of those bracketology guys, man, I think Wake's dead. I really do. I don't think that Wake Forest can make the NCAA tournament without beating North Carolina, which I don't think is happening. So that's one team gone. From the perspective of Pitt, I think their bubble's a little bit more alive than Wake Forest, but I still think that they would need to beat North Carolina to get into the NCAA tournament. So for me, I think Pitt's out as well. And then we just did a whole preview on Clemson, Virginia, and that hypothetical matchup if the Tigers are able
yeah.
to get by the Eagles. I think Clemson's going to beat Virginia. So for me, 3/4. The hypothetical that the ACC could potentially get 5 or 6, I'm completely shutting that down. I think that's dead. I think that's long gone. Virginia is your fourth team if you're going to get 4 in. And the thing with Virginia is if they lose to Clemson, you're in a position where you have to start monitoring, which is like, okay, well, now we have to look at the Mountain West tournament because we need Boise State to beat Colorado State to stay above them on the bubble. You're going to have 15 games like that for Virginia if they lose that first round of the tournament. Now, with that being said, if Virginia beats Clemson, I think they're in. So that is their season. Virginia is playing for their season, in my opinion, on Thursday afternoon against
Mhm.
Clemson, or Thursday evening, rather. I think that Virginia has to beat Clemson to get in the NCAA tournament. And if Virginia loses to Clemson, I think this is a 3-bid league. It sucks to say. I don't agree with it. I'm just telling you guys from what I'm seeing from the information from all these people, it's going to be such a weird thing on Selection Sunday to look up at that screen and see ACC and a number 3 beside it, but it's trending towards that's the realistic destination for what this league is this year.
Yeah. The number is kind of shocking, like when you say it, and I'm following along with you, and it's not bright, but I would say as if you're an ACC fan and you're like, man, like, no, that's exciting. I listened to this whole thing, and you're saying me 3 teams get in. The 3 teams that get in, like Clemson, North Carolina, and Duke, potentially Virginia. I don't feel great about Virginia even if they get in, but let's say those top 3 teams. I think those teams each at least make the Sweet 16. With North Carolina as a strong Final Four team and maybe Duke an Elite Eight. Like that's still a strong showing, So I would say that like the ACC has done a good job of when their teams get in, they can make a run, but it's just how many you get in, and I think it's just gonna be a disappointing thing, and I think they're gonna have to come back the next year. And as we look at scheduling and look at teams, gonna have to play better in the non-conference and set themselves up better. But I
Nick,
agree.
if I could add one more thing too, I
Yeah,
just
please.
literally thought about it in my head
Yeah.
before I let you go. The one thing that I forgot to mention with the whole bracketology analysis in Virginia, there's going to be bid stealers in these conference tournaments. There's going to
Yes.
be teams that are
Yes.
currently
I'm glad you
outside
said
of the
that.
field of 68
Mm-hmm.
that can make one of these voodoo magic runs to win their conference tournament.
Yep.
We all love it. It's the darling of the NCAA tournament. We all love the just above 500 team out of the A-Sun getting in. We know they're going to get beat by 15 in the first round, and we don't care. Unfortunately for Virginia, that's a problem because that's your bid if somebody does that in the conference tournament.
Yep.
So if you're
Yep.
Virginia and you lose that first round, you're sweating bullets around the country, dude. Sweating bullets, praying to the Lord that all of those teams that are projected to get into the NCAA tournament, and you don't have any drama on Selection Sunday about bubble talk because some 18-win team out west won their conference tournament.
I agree. It's a great point. I'm glad you mentioned it because yeah, that's a big thing to watch, and it's a fun fun part of this week and fun part of March. But for a team like Virginia, you want chalk because it means that there's more spots.
Yeah,
Because,
you
like you
want
said,
chalk.
there's 64, 68 teams, but we're really talking about an at-large bid. We're probably talking about 32 bids, and you're fighting with a lot of other teams that have great metrics. So it's tough, you know. And so they're definitely the fourth team, even though they're the third team in the tournament, in the ACC tournament. They're like the fourth team in the ranking of ACC teams trying to
Yep.
get in. So, well, there you have it. That is a full breakdown. I'm excited to as we get started and get into this, where there's a lot of basketball to watch. So yeah, remember to check out Faxon. He is going to be hosting more of the fielding of the 68, like more bracketology. He gets to talk about this more, and I'm really thankful that he got some time to talk and break down some stuff and give us a lot of fun numbers. And yeah, we'll have more of that, more stuff on the roar, more to come. Yeah, remember to like and subscribe to the podcast if you get the opportunity. It really helps, and share with people who might be interested. But Faxon, thanks so much for joining and just making some time to get to talk some ACC hoops. This was really fun.
Nick, you know you're my guy, man. I love you. Anytime you need me on the pod, I will be on the pod for you. And hey, man, we're not that far from football season. We're about to be back in the booth together. That's going to be exciting times as well in the upstate.
Yeah, I love it. I'm excited. Well, thanks for listening, guys. And for now, we are signing off.